So now that I've built this brand new Cerakote booth, I'm dumping Cerakote. I'm not gonna be using it on any more of my products. I've just gotten too frustrated with it and I've wasted too much time and money on it. Guys, guess what? Cerakote came through. In my last video, I asked them to give me some free laser cutting time and they did. And like way more than I asked for. One of the big things I need to do right now is build out the Better Keychains product line. And Cerakote gave me enough credit that I can prototype everything that I want to. So these parts right here were just some of my practice parts that I did in the last batch. I wouldn't sell any of these. None of these are good enough to go to a customer. And yes, that's a 1, 2, 3 block, but it was already ruined before I Cerakoted it. Now, there's a couple reasons that I keep scrapping parts, and I will say the #1 biggest reason that I scrap parts with Cerakote is because I'm bad at it. Your results may vary. Cerakote is very much an art, and there are people doing awesome things with it. I just will never be one of those people. There are some industries and some use cases where Cerakote is the only option or by far the best option over powder coating. So while it doesn't work for me, it may work for you. So let's talk about what Cerakoting and powder coating are. They're both ways of painting a product, of getting color in a protective coat onto a piece of metal or potentially not metal, but we're talking about metal today. So this, for example, is Cerakoted, and basically any piece of metal that it has color on it that you've seen in your life is powder coated. Like the mill, like these toolboxes, all that stuff is powder coated. If you've seen anything with Cerakote on it that wasn't like an EDC type project, it was probably a gun. Cerakote is mostly used in the firearms industry as a high temperature coating. It also gets used a lot in the engine industry because again, it is high temperature and then also it is very thin. It's thin enough that you can Cerakote sliding components of both firearms and engines. They even make a special kind of Cerakote that is designed to coat the piston in your engine. Powder coating is quite a bit thicker and has a much lower working temperature. A heavy layer of Cerakote is like 2 thou. A heavy layer of powder coat can be like 10 thou. So if you have a moving mechanism, you may need to go Cerakote over powder coat. Cerakote is painted on, whereas powder coat basically just uses electricity and magic to stick on. Cerakote takes a lot of skill and care, and powder coat can just kind of be done willy-nilly. And that is why I'm switching, because powder coating is so much more reliable of a process if you're not just doing like a one-off custom gun. The other thing I like about powder coating is there is no nasty chemicals involved. Worst case, you're using like simple green to degrease your part. The Cerakote paint itself has a pretty nasty smell to it, and it's being vaporized and sprayed when you're applying it. And then also you have to clean all of your tools with acetone. So let's talk about the equipment that you need to get started. So this is a super cheap HVLP gun. These are about $15 at Harbor Freight, and they work great for Cerakote. They do wear out over time as the ceramic paint goes through the needle and makes it larger and ruins the spray pattern. But for 15 bucks, you can just keep a spare on hand. If you are doing Cerakote professionally, you would definitely want to invest in a nicer quality gun. Cerakote sells their own system for like $400 or $500, which is a lot compared to this. But considering you can start a whole Cerakote business with just that equipment, it's really not a bad deal. Now this is a powder coat gun, also from Harbor Freight. This one was 80 bucks and I had a 25% off coupon. Both of these guns are powered by air. They don't need much volume, but it needs to be clean and dry. So I have a drop with a filter regulator on it and then a quick connect that I use on that hose there. So let's talk about the coatings themselves. This is Cerakote. It comes in a liquid form, looks like this. You can also get these little small tester units, but they're rather pricey for what they are. I believe these are 8 ounces and they cost you about 35 bucks before shipping. The price does go down pretty radically as you get into the larger sizes, but it's still kind of an expensive consumable. If you're using the H series Cerakote, which basically everybody does, it also comes with a hardener. If you're doing large amounts, you need to carefully measure those out with a graduated cylinder. If you're doing small amounts, I found that a scale works better. Just make sure you find one that goes to 0.1 grams. Before applying this paint, you also need to shake it for 10 to 15 minutes, which is a long time to shake a can. Cerakote does recommend and sells paint shakers. So if you were doing this professionally, you'd probably want to get one of those. Otherwise, your arm gets tired. Powder coating comes as, well, a powder, not a liquid. Harbor Freight sells it in little jars like this. I ordered some high quality powder coat from the same company that makes Cerakote. It hasn't come in yet, but I'll show you how that's packaged if it comes in before the end of this edit. So apparently the higher quality powder coats just come in a bag. This was a pound of powder, which was about 8 bucks at Harbor Freight. The high quality powders I am buying are between $12 and $20 a pound. I'm not experienced enough yet in powder coating to know how far this will go, but to my understanding, it's far farther than one of those 8-ounce testers of Cerakote. Your consumable costs are definitely much lower with powder coating. Cerakote is also a proprietary process with proprietary chemicals and proprietary paint. There's one company and only one company that makes Cerakote. While in my opinion, it's actually a pretty great company with a good suite of options, just being one company, because they are only one company, there is a limit to the number of options they provide. So Cerakote has a kind of limited selection in colors and finishes. Powder coating has the opposite problem. I mean, you can buy it at Harbor Freight. There are so many companies that make so many different kinds of powder coat. Prismatic Powders, which is the powder coating arm of Cerakote, has, I don't know, 500, 1,000 different powders easily. Different colors, different textures, different gloss levels. You can get powder coats that are clear. You can get powder coats that look like chrome plating. You can get powder coats that add grip for safety when you're stepping on them, like that grip tape. If somebody's thought of it, it probably exists as a powder coat. Since Cerakote is a liquid paint, you can mix it to hit custom colors. That doesn't work with powder coating, because powder coat is a powder and not a liquid. If you mixed it and sprayed it, you would just end up with a speckling of one color speckled with the other color. They would probably blend from far away, but you would notice up close. Though now that I say that, that would probably look cool in some applications. So let's talk about surface prep for both of these processes. For Cerakote, you start by putting your part in a strong degreasing solution. I believe they recommend acetone. I use Simple Green in an ultrasonic cleaner. Acetone would probably work better, but I don't like the fumes. After degreasing, you then have to sandblast your part in a blast cabinet. I have one specifically set aside for Cerakote with the specific media that they recommend. So while you technically don't need a big compressor to apply the Cerakote, you do need a big one to run your sandblaster, which is why I have this 80-gallon, which still runs a lot when I'm sandblasting. So you need a lot of compressor to do it. The blast cabinet and the big compressor is probably your biggest cost to getting into Cerakote. After sandblasting, you have to make sure you're handling it with gloves. You need to blow off your part with compressed air. Then you need to heat it to 300 degrees for an hour. I use this electric smoker to do that. That is called gassing the part out, and it makes sure that if there is any moisture left inside the part or any oils left on the outside, that they get burned out. From there, you can take your part out and paint it. With powder coating, following that exact same process would probably give you the best possible results, but you really won't see a huge amount of benefit by putting in that much effort. For my parts, which I know are coming straight from the mill, I don't feel a need to gas them out because they're coming from brand new pristine aluminum. If it was cast iron, maybe, but for new machine parts, unnecessary to gas them out for powder coating. I do still sandblast my parts to give them a little bit more tooth on the powder, and then I also degrease them in the ultrasonic. Though, notice that I sandblast and then degrease. I don't know why Cerakote does it the other way. It seems odd to me. But sandblasting is definitely optional for powder coating. With both powder coating and Cerakote, after you spray your part, you then need to bake it. And again, I just do that in my electric smoker. Works great as both a powder coat and Cerakote oven. The temperatures vary for different kinds of Cerakote, but it's normally 250 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours. The powder coating temperature also varies, but generally your part needs to reach 400 degrees and then sit there for 20 minutes. They recommend using an infrared thermometer to check when your part gets up to the proper temperature so you can start your 20-minute timer. But you can just look at it and visually see your part transition from being kind of a fuzzy powdery to a smoother gloss. Mail time. Better Keychains stickers are here. These will be shipping with all my Better Keychains products. Earlier I mentioned I was designing some products to fill out the Better Keychains line. This is called the Loop, and I really don't have a sales pitch for this yet, but basically you put your key rings on this instead of on something like a carabiner. Some people just don't like carabiners because they think their keys are gonna fall off. This is basically a carabiner for those people because your keys can't fall off. It just gives your key rings a home. It's a big key ring. It's a big key ring for your little key rings. I'm making them out of stainless steel, so even if the coating does fail, they're not gonna rust. They'll be basically indestructible. Now this one looks really similar to the Loop, but it's got a split in it, and you can't tell from CAD because everything's the same size in CAD, but it's much smaller. One of the things I sell a shocking amount of on Etsy is titanium key rings. This is a way that I can make titanium key rings myself for a fairly competitive price. The loop was almost the exact same size as my carabiners. These split rings are only 1 inch long and 5/8 of an inch wide. A standard split ring is 1 inch in diameter. I do have to say that this is entirely experimental. I don't know if this will, 1, be easy to get your keys on and off, but also 2, secure enough to keep your keys from falling off when you don't want them to. I'm gonna have to experiment with the size and the shape of this to really understand, which is why it's so awesome that Cut Send is helping me out with these, because it's super easy to get prototypes and to do iterations. It's faster just to order prototypes from Cut Send than it is for me to order materials and make these. Cut Send did give you guys a coupon code, so if you are prototyping something, you can save 15% off with the code that's down in the description. Those are all the products that I have designed right now, but I have a bunch more ideas that I'm working on. But back to talking about coatings. So now let's talk about how you actually apply the coating for the 2 different processes. So the powder coat gets like poofed out of the end of this gun. It's not really a spray, they call it a cloud, kind of like vaping. On its own, that powder doesn't actually want to stick to anything. So that little stick coming out of the end of the gun is an electrode that gives a positive charge to the particles coming out of the end of the gun. This little clip goes on the part that you're coating, giving it a negative charge. As you're spraying, you have positively charged particles mingling around with your negatively charged parts, and inevitably they're gonna merge. The little powder coat particles will just magically stick to your part, and the real beauty of the system is that the particles are insulating. So as they build up in an area, it eliminates that charge. It reduces the attractiveness to the other particles. So the other particles are gonna wanna go find places that are still bare. So to some extent, powder coat is self-leveling, where particles will tend to wanna go to places where the powder is the thinnest. Now in reality, it is still very possible to over powder coat some areas of your part, particularly down in the bottom of pockets. Gravity is still a force and also attracts those particles. At this point, the powder coat is just loosely applied to your part. And it's really easy to knock it off by brushing your part into something or by even like jiggling it too hard when you're moving it, which that is a downside. But the upside of this is that if you decide that you don't like the coating on your part, if you have too much powder in some places or if it's uneven or whatever, you can take an air gun and blow off the powder and just start over again. You don't need to go through the whole finishing process again of degreasing and sandblasting and all of that and removing the old coating. All you have to do is use compressed air and you can start again. That makes rework way quicker and easier than with like Cerakote. Once you are happy with your coating on your part, that's when you move it into the oven to bake it. So now there are lots of different kinds of powder coats, but the most common kind is just plastic. It is not any sort of chemical reaction. It is just taking fine powder and melting it down and fusing it together to form a little cocoon around your part. You're literally just melting an even layer of powder onto your part. There's not really any magic there. The magic is all in the application process. Cerakote, on the other hand, is a chemical reaction, but I believe it is basically a 2-part epoxy that is super saturated with ceramic particles. You spray it just like it was paint, it acts and feels just like any other paint that I've sprayed. The biggest catch is it does not self-regulate on how much coating goes where. And Cerakote is a lot more sensitive to how thick the coating is. If you have too much, it'll run and be ugly and not be as durable. If you have too little, then, well, your part's showing. Though I have found with Cerakote, it is easier to do too much than too little. You really don't need that thick of a Cerakote coating. The thing that absolutely drives me insane with applying Cerakote is when you're trying to spray inside little details. It is really difficult to get enough coating in the details while not overcoating everything around the details. And that's right there is the reason I am switching to powder coating. If I just had big flat parts, I would stay with Cerakote. The other catch with Cerakote is that if you make a mistake, you have to start the whole process over. You either have to immediately rinse your part in acetone, or you have to just go ahead and bake it and then re-sandblast it. Honestly, in my opinion, it's easier just to bake it and then sandblast. You also cannot spray a new layer of Cerakote over an old layer. New Cerakote does not adhere to old Cerakote. Though there is a process where if you are doing multiple colors or like a 2-sided object where you can spray one color or one side, do a semi-cure, flip it or change your color, and then do the other side and then do a full cure. That process is a little bit finicky about timing, but it's not very hard. With powder coat, you can do second layers or 2 different colors pretty much willy-nilly. The only catch is that you need a higher voltage powder coat gun if you're gonna do thicker and thicker coating. And lastly, let's talk about cleanup. At the end of the day, both systems are messy. Personally, I prefer to do the cleanup of Cerakote over powder coat. I think the powder coat is technically easier to clean up, but it's harder to contain, if that makes sense. It's kind of like the difference between cleaning up after mud or cleaning up after glitter. Cerakote is like mud. Like, it's a bigger mess, it's goopier, you have to use acetone to clean it up, and it's easy to like drip and spill. But like, once you're done, it's done. But powder coat is like glitter, where like, yeah, okay, you can grab a broom and sweep it up pretty easily, but like, there will always be glitter, and it travels and gets in things and just like never comes out. And you can have glitter in one room and then be finding it in the next room. That's kind of my experience with powder coating. And granted, maybe my booth isn't set up right for it yet. Like, I'm still planning on making improvements for that, especially in some sort of work area that'll catch the powder coat for me. But like, it's a mess. With Cerakote, you basically just clean everything out with acetone. It'd probably be a good idea to have a ultrasonic cleaner full of acetone for this purpose. But personally, I don't like the fumes of that much acetone. Even just doing it on a rag, that's enough for me. Speaking of fumes, to clean out your Cerakote gun, you fill the hopper full of acetone and you spray it for a bit. Make sure you're wearing a mask and in a well-ventilated area, and there's not sparks, because I'm pretty sure that's an explosion hazard. But it works really well. With powder coating, you basically just blow everything down with an air gun and sweep. Then you just blow out your powder coating gun with compressed air. The stuff on the floor can just be swept into a pile and then vacuumed. Now, the big question that everyone asks is durability of powder coat versus Cerakote. I would have to say, for my products, powder coat is more durable than Cerakote. Now, they both have strengths and weaknesses, but I think powder coat has more durability strengths than Cerakote has. Powder coat is not as hard as Cerakote, and it's more flexible, though Cerakoting is surprisingly flexible. For both coatings, the biggest factor about their durability is the material they're applied to rather than the coating itself. If you take either coating and apply it to an aluminum substrate, that will be less durable than if you took it and you applied it to a hardened steel substrate. It doesn't matter what you put on a piece of aluminum, if you drop it right on its corner, it's gonna dent. Neither coating will protect you from that. If you take a nail and gouge into the aluminum, it doesn't matter what coating you have on there, because the metal itself is not soft enough to prevent the gouging. That being said, Cerakote is harder than powder coat. If you take a piece of Scotch-Brite or fine grit sandpaper to a piece that is Cerakoted or a piece that is powder coated and give them a rub, the Cerakote will show less damage than the powder coating. Cerakote is also better at heat. I don't remember the heat specs off the top of my head, but I believe some of the high temperature Cerakotes can get to like 1700 degrees Fahrenheit, which I think is close to melting aluminum. Powder coating is basically limited to its curing temperature down, which tends to be 400, maybe 500 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. Now, I do believe there are some high temperature powder coats, but I don't know anything about them or how they work. So Cerakote is not a bad product. I'm dumping it for a number of reasons, but like, it's fine for a lot of people in a lot of use cases. But I think powder coating is better for more of the common use cases that a everyday used object will see. Engines and guns are edge cases. Things like carabiners and keychains and keys and trays and toolboxes and tools, those are all much more common and I think better suited to powder coat. Powder coating is way thicker than Cerakote, and it just holds up better to most kinds of abuse over Cerakote. It's not affected nearly as dramatically by things like dings and dents and like everyday abuse, like the kind of abuse that you find in your pocket or like a tool would be subjected to. So in short, Cerakote has some special applications where it shines, but for general use, it is not as durable as powder coat. The second biggest question I get is cost. The biggest cost for both the systems is probably going to be your air compressor. If you already have an air compressor, getting into either system is really cheap. If you're going to be Cerakoting at any volume, you do need a bigger air compressor to run your sandblaster. But for either system, you can really get started with a reasonably effective system for like under $500, especially if you're doing small parts that don't need a large oven. If you're just doing small parts that you can do in a Goodwill toaster oven, you could really probably get started for like 300 bucks in either system. But I do have a confession to make. When I started this video, I was using the Harbor Freight powder coating gun, which is only $80. That worked fine with the Harbor Freight powder coat powder, but when I moved to the prismatic powder gloss powders, I started running into issues with what's called orange peeling. Long story short, orange peeling is just an ugly finish on your parts. It comes from a number of factors, but the two big ones are either not enough voltage or too much voltage in your part. Now, I don't know which problem I have because the Harbor Freight gun is not adjustable whatsoever. Powder was sticking just fine and the finish was plenty durable. I know because I sandblasted off a lot of them, but it did not meet my aesthetic standards. So I had to purchase a more expensive powder coating gun that gives me all of that adjustability so that I can get the finishes that I want. Now that gun's not here yet, so I haven't been able to test, and maybe the Harbor Freight gun is just fine and it's not the voltage, but that seems like the most likely option to me. The little $15 spray guns that Harbor Freight sells, I would say sprays just as well as the expensive guns that Cerakote sells. So while you can get started in powder coating and Cerakote for about 500 bucks, I would say the $500 Cerakote system is closer to the professional system than a $500 powder coating system. For Cerakote, the highest quality guns I believe max out at about $1,000. With powder coating, you can easily get up to $10,000 for a very high-end system. But also that $10,000 powder coating system can probably also spray 100 times more parts in the same amount of time as that $1,000 Cerakote system. So again, it all balances and it comes down to personal preferences. In the description down below, I'll have Amazon links to everything you need to get started with powder coating and everything you need to get started with Cerakoting. I'm linking everything on Amazon. You can get it cheaper at Harbor Freight. My final thoughts are, use Cerakote if you are in the niche where it matters, and if you are doing any other sort of manufacturing, use powder coat.